Hello, I am Richard Thomas, and thank you for joining me in a brand new episode of the Weekly Defence Podcast. This week we are brought to you in partnership with our sponsor Wärtsilä Shaftline Solutions. I'm joined in the virtual studio by land reporter Flavia Camargo-Pereira and air editor Tim Martin. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hi, Rich.
Hi, guys. Coming up in the show, we discuss the publication of the UK's integrated review ahead of the Command White Paper next week. We'll take a look at the new US administration's approach to Indo-Pacific partnerships. And with our sponsor, we talk about the role of Shaftline Solutions in ensuring naval readiness. All of this is, of course, a little bit later on in the show. First, let's take a look at what has made this week's headlines in defence. And we'll start in the United States, where Raytheon Missiles and Defense claims to have successfully completed the first ever demonstration for the US Army of a Stinger missile fired from a Javelin lightweight command launch unit. At the test at Eglin Air Force Base last week, soldiers from the Mississippi National Guard used a Sentinel radar simulator and a forward area air defense C2 system to track a target UAV. This allowed the gunner to engage the drone with a Stinger Block 1 proximity fused missile through the networked command launch unit. According to Raytheon, the launch unit enables standalone ISR missions as well as functioning as a Javelin launcher. Also in the US, Army field artillery representatives are working with small businesses to come up with solutions to the challenge of increasing firing rates. According to Brigadier General John Rafferty, director of the Long Range Precision Fires Cross-Functional Team at Army Futures Command, 3 companies are already prototyping solutions. Brigadier General Rafferty told Shephard, quote, "We're going to do things differently. We have got to take advantage of innovators that are out there that love solving hard problems because we've got a lot of those." Rafferty also described plans to demonstrate a remotely operated and remotely fired HIMARS launcher in June. And in Asia now, where the Indian Navy submarine fleet received a shot in the arm last week when the third Project 75 diesel-electric boat was commissioned in Mumbai. INS Karani, based on Naval Group Scorpene design, is the third Kalvari-class submarine built by Mazagon Dock Shipbuilders Limited, marking the halfway stage of the 6-boat class. The next phase of India's submarine fleet renewal is Project 75I, which will include advanced features such as phosphoric acid fuel cells for air-independent propulsion. And with that, we can conclude the headlines. Let's get stuck into some more news and bring into the conversation our domain editors. Now, we're still waiting for the MOD Command paper to be released, hopefully on the 22nd of March. But this week, the Prime Minister gave us a taste of what the integrated review will bring to the table. So I wanted to ask you both what you think. Tim, let's go to you first. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think obviously in terms of stepping away from, what we reported, to some extent you wrote a story on it as well, Rich, but that the national press reported on was the increase on the nuclear, the warheads, nuclear deterrent, and things like that. Just stepping away from that on the air side, I think until, as you mentioned, the command paper is released, when we'll get a kind of breakdown of acquisition details, not only across air but also land and sea. This was more about maybe the UK's position in the world and, diplomatic ties and what are the threats, China, Russia and things like that. And beyond all of that, then, you're kind of trying to tease out, what is being committed to or what's different in terms of what the government are talking about when it comes to fighter jets, helicopters, and drones and all the rest of that. As I say, much of that will take place next week. So in terms of the anticipation for the review itself, that this first part, for those who are tracking this day and daily, I think it was a bit of an anticlimax. And the big reveals, I think, is what everyone is really looking forward to. And as I say, in terms of the journalists. So I suppose there was, though, some slight indication on the F-35 as to future plans, because as part of the £24 billion uplift in spending across 4 years, some of that will be provided for the 48 on contract at the moment, which is good news, I think, for the programme itself and for decision makers, because I've flagged up before the Public Accounts Committee, of course, in their report in November 2020 said that there was a £7.9 billion black hole for the F-35 programme. So you would suspect that the Lockheed Martin UK will be very pleased with that. and maybe it straightens out some of those financial troubles. But having said that, the only mention of the F-35 was that, or for the funding itself, was that it would progress carrier strike capabilities, and the line was with at least 48 F-35s. So yeah, it's absolutely open to interpretation. Does at least 48 mean that there is going to be the follow-on contract of 90? Or is that a way to lower expectations almost and say, well, we will have 48, but we're not prepared to commit to a maximum? Because as we know, the maximum, or the program of record, as identified in the Strategic Defence and Security Review in 2015, the intention was to acquire 138. So there's definitely a frenzy in terms of the media looking on at this and thinking, what exactly is the final number going to be? There's, because, even Boris Johnson was asked in Parliament yesterday, could he confirm what cuts are going to be made? He made absolutely no statement on that. I think that was by the chair of the PAC, Meg Hillier, actually asked him directly if he could speak about cuts, and he simply didn't. He focused on the investments that were being made. I think by and large that was the main story that to come out of the first part. There's going to be at least 48 F-35s. Not news, really, because the 48 have been on contract for quite some time. So it's just whether in the week ahead we get any final number, or whether there is a reduction. And should say that the Sunday Times put it in black and white that the follow-on order would be cancelled. So that we will see. I was on as I recall, I think it was the 7th of March. Yeah, 7th of March when they detailed that.
Tim, this gap, the black hole for the program, this 7.9 billion, is that based around 138 aircraft, or the 90 that?
Yeah, it is. I don't have the exact phrase to hand, but it was to fund the 48 already in contract and those to follow. I'm pretty sure that was the reference made by the PAC.
Yeah, so that's like a worst case black hole, isn't it? If you assume that the UK isn't going to buy 138, which we all frankly expect that to happen, that black hole is going to shrink through naturally not acquiring 138 if they get 70 or 90 or so.
Yeah, we have in terms of the calculation for the follow-on 90 under the Lot 14 production and a unit price, the F-35 at 101 million, that would work out at about 101 million per aircraft. That would work out roughly about 9.1 billion saved for the UK. But of course, then the saving would be welcomed in terms of those who are looking at financial oversight bodies. But of course, then from a capabilities point of view, I think it would be frowned upon. Yeah, of course.
I think the PM in Parliament mentioned FCAS. That's just reading between the lines, which is what we do. It seems to be a lot of attention is being placed on FCAS as obviously a platform that people need, but a way to sustain the UK's aerospace manufacturing industry, right? Yeah,
that's exactly it. But you can actually just separate this into, for next week, you could potentially separate it into Lockheed Martin are potentially going to lose out quite significantly from an industrial strength perspective, and then of course BAE then would be the big winners. Let's say you could frame things like that, but then you could also have the BAE perspective, which is actually no, we're part of the F-35 program. As much as fifth generation and sixth generation technologies are different, and you could argue there's a competition there. I don't think BAE would say that a reduction in the number of F-35s is of particular help to them, because they obviously are part of the program as well. So I guess their ideal scenario would be pump extra funding into FCAS, as well as maintaining the 138 program of record for the F-35.
Yeah. Anything else pop up from the the IR, or was that it in terms of headlines, you think?
Yeah, so that's all for the IR, but I actually would like to flag one other big piece of news, which is that the UK has invested in switchblade loitering munitions made by AeroVironment. And we've had AeroVironment on the podcast previously. But why this is of significance is that, as far as I can read, there isn't a full acquisition underway for the UK to buy switchblade loitering munitions to this point. So the news came as part of, or was revealed rather, in a US DoD contract published on the 16th of March. It's quite interesting because it says that FY 2010 FMS fundings from the UK has been provided for the Switchblade, as I mentioned, but it's undisclosed in terms of quantity. It doesn't mention whether it's for testing purposes or so. It's slightly up in the air as to what the thinking is behind it. As we speak, I've reached out to some sources, haven't had anything by the way of confirmation to reveal anything further. But I think in terms of the fact that this is breaking news and what this might signify about the perspective the UK has on our power, and as we've talked about, moves from smaller, not small, I'm not fitting the UK under the bracket of smaller countries, but smaller countries have exactly, but smaller. It's become a trend for those who are looking at loitering munitions as cheaper alternatives to fire and forget missiles to buy loitering munitions. I think that's really the point I'm trying to get across. So perhaps the UK has looked at that and thought, we should move in the same direction, which is to say that if you can get these things for cheaper and they're proven, then why not go ahead and try it out? And that seems to be the case here. But again, as I say, no official confirmation as to what the thinking is behind here from MOD and others.
That sounds like a stay tuned, or in which case, if it's coming out on Friday, of course, or if you're listening to us on Friday, I guess read the story on the website. Not to put a deadline on you, Tim, but you've basically got 2 days to get the story done. So good luck with that.
Thanks, appreciate the pressure.
Right. Who wants to ask me about what I think about the IR?
Yeah, exactly, Rich. What was the big ideas that caught your attention from the Navy perspective? And I suppose you're going to tell me as well in terms of next week will be the big news, but without mentioning any of that, I guess what did you see and pick up?
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting. First off, I have to say that this review, more than any I've covered, really for some reason really captured the imagination of the denizens of social media, didn't it? I think people may have lost a little bit of their objectivity on this one. You have the issue with the embargo and all that. Government lost control of the release process, clearly. So it's just fascinating to see this social media free-for-all that unfolded before our eyes. Yeah, so anyway, so you've already said it, that the UK is going to move to expand its nuclear weapons stockpile up to 260 warheads, which is quite a big change from, a decade-long effort to reduce the nuclear ceiling from 225 to 180. I don't exactly know how many operational warheads the UK has at the moment, but it's, in the region of 180, 190, something like that. So quite a big uptick, really. Just to give you an idea, these warheads, which are mounted on top of Trident II D5 missiles, 100 kiloton yield. Just as comparison, the Hiroshima bomb was a 15 kiloton yield. But the largest nuclear explosion or test carried out was Russia with the Tsar bomber at 50 megatons. So these are impressive missiles. They're, you don't want to ever see them used in anger. I hope I never live to see that day. But for some reason, the UK's decided it needs more of them. That's its call. Fair enough. That was interesting. That kind of links into AWE, Atomic Weapons Establishment, being renationalised. That happened at the back end of last year, didn't it? Which is going to be completed in June this year. So that site and those sites have an awful lot of work to do. There's one just down the road from me, in fact. So they're going to be busy on a lot of things. Interesting, you just mentioned before that Lockheed Martin might be losing out in terms of potentially losing out, let's say, in terms of the F-35 program. Lockheed Martin is a 51% majority shareholder in AWE, which is also going to lose out there. It isn't going to be part of that process, or it'll be a very minority part of that process, I think. And I don't know, probably Flavia can talk to us a little bit later on, or maybe speculate as to Lockheed Martin's position on the Warrior Capability Sustainment Program. So it seems that company's taking a trio of hits. So, yeah, good luck. So anyway, and as you said, this is all about a pivot, isn't it? Another pivot, another country pivoting or tilting to the Indo-Pacific. It's a good job that the Earth is a sphere and not flat, because I think with the rush of all these countries towards that region, it would probably tip over if it were. But so on the naval side, not too much. We obviously know, we've got an idea as to what we can expect next week. I don't want to jump the gun and kind of speculate as to what has been written. Those stories have been written and we've all read them. So, as I say, we have an idea as to what might happen. But yeah, the only thing I can say on the naval side is that at the Society for Maritime Industry's annual conference this week, SecDef Ben Wallace announced that the naval shipbuilding strategy is going to get a refresh. And he and other military officials were urging shipyards to increase productivity in order to compete with European and international rivals. But this refresh is going to, I think, focus an awful lot more on not just shipbuilding. There's a squabble about you must build a hull in a UK yard. Well, it's going to expand UK shipbuilding into improving the repair capability, the sustainment capability, building of subsystems and things like that. So it's more of a redraw of the strategy into encompassing shipbuilding in the round and not just focusing on where can we build the hull, which seems a pretty sensible and holistic way to do it, I think.
Yeah, so all eyes on next week, basically.
All eyes on next week. It's going to be chaos again. I look forward to it. Yeah, thanks, Tim. Onwards to Flavia. Right. So this is actually going to be the last time for a while that you're going to be on the podcast. You're about to embark on maternity leave. Congratulations. A brilliant adventure awaits. It's quite terrifying, just from first-hand experience. It's good fun, but it's definitely a life-changing moment. So enjoy that one.
Thank you. Actually, I'm quite excited.
Okay, that must be the difference between me being terrified just about everything that happens in my life and the rest of the world. So that's okay. Well done. Okay, Flavia, to comment on yesterday's announcement, there was, as Tim and I have said, there wasn't an awful lot to be drawn in specifics, but in general, what could you sort of grab from the review?
Actually, Richard, regarding land forces, the main point is the major armies' armored vehicle programs weren't mentioned in the Prime Minister's speech. So Boris Johnson claimed that there will be maximum investments in land forces, but the emphasis was placed on cyber tech and innovation. I think it's worth mentioning. Currently, the British Army runs 4 armored platform programs: the procurement of the Ajax and the Boxer, and the modernization of the Challenger 2 and the Warrior. Apart from their absence in the Prime Minister's speech, I think it was interesting the fact representatives also didn't ask questions about these programs. It seems that they are not concerned about the armored capabilities of the British Army.
Yeah, there was no hint, was there, as to which programs might suffer when this command white paper comes out next week. I mean, do you have any sort of comment or thoughts about that?
It's not hard to figure out the programs that will suffer some cuts. Ajax and Boxer are contractually committed, so they are likely to move forward. But the Challenger and the Warrior, the agreements to upgrade both they were expected in 2021. So in this sense, Challenger 2 and Warrior would be the most threatened programs. I think it'll be hard for these programs, to be honest, to compete with cyber technology for investment. And actually, the Prime Minister speech is the second sign that some arms programs may not move forward. In November last year, Boris Johnson announced a 16.5 billion multi-year investment in defense capabilities, and the armored platform programs weren't mentioned at that time. I just think it's interesting to mention the Challenger 2 is in service with the British Army since the 90s and Warrior since the 80s. So they are old platforms and they can't face threats of the battlefield of the future.
Yeah, I remember when the announcement was made for the increase in UK spending, you made a point of pointing out the fact that the land side of things was not mentioned. And I suppose you can read between lines, to use that phrase again, that omitting that kind of capabilities in those platforms doesn't bode well for next week. Also, there was a bit of a furore just before the IR was released with was it the Public Affairs Committee or the Defence Committee released a report expressing concern, must have been the Defence Committee, concern about the situation for UK armoured vehicles. So what do you think about that one?
Actually, Richard, the House of Commons Defense Committee, they released this report just before the first part of the integrated review. And this document, it highlighted obsolescence in British Army armored fleet and warned that the service is at serious risk of being outmatched by its most challenging peer adversaries. And actually, this document, there were tough comments there. It said that the British platforms are very heavily outgunned and with poor mechanical reliability. And for the Defense Committee, failures to deliver new types of ground platforms came from 2 decades of bureaucratic procrastination, military indecision, financial mismanagement, and general ineptitude. So I think they used tough words to describe the current situation. And the document also claimed that the UK armored fighting vehicle capability is deplorable. And since the end of the Cold War, army platforms have been characterized by increasing obsolescence and decreasing numbers. In this sense, Richard, the report pointed out that the UK had about 1,200 main battle tanks in the 90s, and today there are just 227, which are in urgent need of modernization.
I mean, you say tough comments. You've got words like, what have we got here? What did you say? Indecision, financial mismanagement, general ineptitude, deplorable. I mean, those are tough words. Those are incredible words to actually be said. Did the report mention specific programs? Did it go into the specifics where the IR was unable to do so?
Yeah, it spoke about the 4 main armies programs. The report noted that the Challenger 2 is the only main battle tank available to the British Army. As it's not upgraded, the report pointed out that this platform is less capable than the German Leopard or the American Abrams. Actually, it said this platform would be outmatched by the Russian T-14 Armata, for example. So I think it's a situation that's not what the British Army wants to have. And in the case of the Warrior, the document said that the program has spent around 50% of the allocated budget, which is around 800 million pounds. But the program is yet to place a manufacturing contract. And it's also said the Warrior is currently 227 million over budget and with delays. Regarding the Ajax, the Defense Committee noted that the program is behind schedule and is another example of chronic mismanagement. And in the case of the Boxer, It emphasized that the procurement should be accelerated to ensure the Army receives these new capabilities as soon as possible. The report also touched on the need of retiring the FV430, which has been in service for 60 years. Which I think it's kind of scary to keep a platform for 60 years in service. And as you don't have options or a plan to retire, maybe it'll be in service for 70 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it sort of depends on the platform, doesn't it? Because we were talking offline the other day about the B-50, the US Air Force's B-52s getting new engines, and the idea that that platform might actually be flying, or that design might be flying for over 100 years in active service. So you never know, maybe the FV430 can get 100 years in British Army active service, by which time it'll be falling to pieces. Thanks, Flavia. Listen, we look forward to having you back on just as soon as possible. Congratulations again. Good luck and all the best.
Thank you.
So for our listeners, if you want to find out more about Shephard's daily defence news coverage, previous episodes of the podcast, video content and more, please visit our website, shepherdmedia.com/news. Coming up next, I talk with editor and journalist Duncan Bartlett about US delegations being dispatched to the Indo-Pacific region in the context of China's recent announcement of a 6.8% rise in defence spending. Stay with us.
Hello, generic advertising company. Make it quick.
Hi there. We've got some great news. Our R&D team has made a breakthrough and we need to spread the word throughout the defence community so those that influence buying know what they're missing out on.
I've got a few print magazine ads you can have. It's going to cost you a pretty penny though.
Oh, I was hoping for something a bit more modern? I need to be sure we're reaching a very specific audience.
Do you want them or not?
Discover the benefits of digital advertising with Shephard. We work with you to understand your campaign objectives first, apply our 40 years of rich audience knowledge to help select an advertising product that works best for you. And when the campaign is over, we provide transparent reporting so that you can see the value of advertising with Shephard for yourself. With higher than industry average click-through rates, you're buying more than just impressions when you buy with Shephard. Looking to stand out? Head over to www.shepherdmedia.com/studio to request a free, no-obligation consultation where we'll discuss how to reach your intended audience with the most impact.
Having changed the drapes and swapped around the pictures inside the Oval Office, the new Biden presidency has wasted little time in attempting to undo much of what the preceding Trump administration achieved during its time in power, with Team Biden suspending arms sales to Saudi Arabia, restarting the suspended START treaty, backing the Paris Climate Accords, and a whole lot more. But is there commonality in the Indo-Pacific? Indeed, can President Biden do any better at containing a Chinese hegemony over the region? How might it respond to the next ballistic parade in Pyongyang? Well, to mull over these points, we can welcome back Duncan Bartlett, editor of the Asian Affairs magazine, research associate at the SOAS China Institute at the University of London, where he presents the podcast China in Context. Duncan, hi again. Great to have you back on.
Thanks for having me back on the podcast, Richard.
Absolutely. So a flurry of visits by newly appointed US officials to key Indo-Pacific allies and rivals perhaps points to where President Biden feels quite safe in focusing in a geopolitical context. We have the visits to Tokyo and Seoul by the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on the 16th and 17th of March, and the meeting between the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi on the 18th and 19th of March. So what do these messages or these visits, these delegations convey?
Well, let's start with the visit to Tokyo, Japan. The Japanese were very pleased to meet the Americans. They thought this is a case of business as usual. Actually, the previous Japanese Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, had a good relationship with Donald Trump. There was one bone of contention, which is that Mr. Trump kept pressing the Japanese to pay more for their defense and security. There are large American bases in Japan, including in Yokohama. Lloyd Austin, the new US Defense Secretary, as far as we know, didn't really raise that issue of money, but he wanted to hear that the Japanese were going to be loyal allies to the United States. They very much said that they would be. So the Japanese Defense Minister, Nobuo Kishi, promised that his country would work with the US military to enhance the capabilities to deter and respond. And then he was very specific about deterring and responding China's movements in the East and South China Seas. Actually, Japan sees China as being a very direct threat. The Chinese Coast Guard often sends vessels which infringe into Japanese waters near the Senkaku Islands, and this causes alarm to Japan, and Japan has been increasing its military budget as well. But it's absolutely foursquare behind the defense alliance with the United States at the moment.
There's always a rush to be seen to be the first country that gets visited by senior officials, isn't there? Does this indicate that Japan is the number one ally for the United States in the Indo-Pacific?
Well, it got another big present as well from the United States, actually, because there was an invitation delivered to the Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga to go to Washington in April. He has to have his COVID-19 vaccination first. And at the moment, Tokyo is still in a state of emergency because of the pandemic. But nevertheless, Mr. Suga and Mr. Biden will be, I suppose, shaking hands. I guess they might be elbow bumping on the lawn of the White House in April. So Japan wants to be seen as the United States' most loyal ally in the Indo-Pacific region. That suits America. And frankly, that's very much the same as the policy was under Mr. Trump and Mike Pompeo.
What about South Korea then? Of course, the US has a huge presence in South Korea, a long-standing ally. How has that visit gone down?
It is an alliance, but it's been under strain again during the Trump years. Similar issues here about how much South Korea should contribute to this defense alliance with the United States. Mr. Blinken told the South Korean Foreign Minister Chung Eui-yong that their country's alliance has never been more important. And of course, he mentioned the challenges posed by China and North Korea. But I think he was also listening. He was listening to see whether the South Koreans are absolutely committed to the alliance, because Mike Pompeo certainly gave the impression that he thought the South Koreans were moving more into China's sphere of influence. And he didn't actually go and see the South Korean President Moon during his final trip to Asia. So I think that Mr. Blinken would like to restore the relationship with the South Koreans, but he's got his work cut out. There's no doubt about that, because the South Koreans have become distrustful of the Americans and actually in some ways rather more careful about the way they approach China. They don't want to be seen to be provoking confrontation.
Sure, that's interesting because, of course, the exercises that the US military and South Korean militaries hold are often viewed on the other side of the border as doing just that, as provoking a confrontation. So do you think a President Biden administration will have a different take as to how regular its military exercises are and at what scale they are conducted at?
Well, the official line is that the Biden administration is taking stock of the situation in the Korean Peninsula. The meetings that took place in Seoul in early March involving Antony Blinken and the Korean Foreign Minister Chung Eui-yong were designed to be a listening exercise. Having said that, you know, Mr. Biden definitely gave the blessing to have those joint military exercises take place between the US and the Republic of Korea this year. They weren't actually troops marching around with guns and tanks and so on. They were mostly simulated exercises. So in a sense, it was quite a downscale because in the past, they've flown jets up into the skies and, you know, practiced bombing raids on Pyongyang. And as a result, actually, there has not so far, I'm pleased to say, been a military response from North Korea. No intercontinental ballistic missile has been tested. There hasn't been another nuclear test. In fact, those tests haven't taken place for 2 or 3 years. What the North Koreans would like, of course, is an invitation for direct talks with President Biden in the White House. They would like another summit, as they had with Donald Trump. but absolutely no sign really that the Americans are interested in doing that. I know Richard has just said that they're still taking stock of their North Korean policy, but they're definitely not softening towards North Korea.
So you wouldn't say that the Biden administration is going to do anything other than take a hard line to what North Korea, to what its aspirations are with regards to visits and recognition at this sort of state level?
Well, the problem is that the attempts by the South Koreans to get a dialogue going with the North Koreans have ended in abject failure. The North Koreans are simply not talking. They blew up the Joint Liaison Office, which was used for negotiations between the South and the North last year. And in fact, Kim Yo-jong, who's the sister of the President Kim Jong-un, warned the United States to refrain from causing a stink if it wants to sleep in peace for the next 4 years. So threatening language coming from North Korea, I'm afraid that has been a characteristic for a long time. But as far as Mr. Blinken was concerned, he's just brushed that off and said, well, I'm here to talk to our friends and allies in the region. I'm not here to respond to what the North Koreans are saying to the Americans in terms of propaganda.
Friends and allies in the region, obviously the US and China have their own respective friends and allies in that region. What other countries might be brought into or pulled into this ratcheting up of tensions or potential conflict?
Well, the other crucial countries here are Australia and India, because the United States, Japan, Australia, and India form an informal defence pact known as the Quad. And shortly before Mr. Blinken headed off on his Asia tour and then back to Alaska to meet the Chinese, there was a meeting of the Quad, and it involved President Joe Biden, the Prime Minister of Japan, the Prime Minister of Australia, and the Prime Minister of India. It could not have been at a higher level. And, in your introduction, you said that there were some changes in policy in the White House. Let me remind you, Richard, that this idea of the Quad was revived during the Trump administration and was pushed very hard by the former US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. I imagine that he would have been clapping his hands in warm applause when he watched the press reports about the video conference that took place in the White House involving Mr. Biden and these other Quad leaders, because there was absolute continuity there between what was going on in the Trump administration in terms of defense and security. They're always talking about securing an open and free Indo-Pacific, and the leaders of India and Japan said that they would be loyal to the United States in this Quad. There is a problem, though. India is officially a non-aligned country, and it has nuclear weapons. Japan has a constitution which prevents its troops from taking part in foreign wars, including to defend an ally. So, in theory, the Quad is a sort of NATO for Asia, which is designed to counterbalance the influence of China. But in practice, I still keep wondering how it will work.
Yeah, that's fair. Can I move on to these the meetings between the senior US and Chinese officials? How do you think both sides are approaching it? What are they looking to get from these kind of exchanges?
I don't think that the meeting in Alaska could be classified as friendly. And Mr. Blinken didn't really roll out the red carpet to the Chinese beforehand. In a speech in early March, he called China an adversary and a competitor. He talked about China being a serious challenge to the stable and open international system. And he made another point, actually, which was about the US military. Mr. Blinken said in early March, we'll make sure that we continue to have the world's most powerful armed forces. Our ability to be effective diplomats depends on no small measure on the strength of our military. Well, that's the situation that the Chinese are walking into. They're doing so with their eyes wide open. So the Chinese diplomat Yang Jie, who's taking part in the talks, has said that these are misguided policies against China being followed by the United States based on Cold War thinking. The Chinese don't want to lose face during this meeting, and indeed, why should they? Because they announced at their big political meeting last week that they expect the Chinese economy to grow by more than 6%. Actually, I was speaking to some economists in Hong Kong this week, and they said, 6%, that's mild. We reckon it could grow by even 9-10% this year. And the other thing is that they recognise that Mr. Biden will need to borrow a lot of money for this big infrastructure project that he's got to revive the American economy. Who's he going to borrow the money from? Probably the Chinese.
Yeah, I mean, when if I put my neutral hat on, if I'm China and I'm faced by a US that's been very explicit over the past 12 months or so in calling the country out and saying the CCP is the biggest threat for the US, it's not surprising then that China would look to counter that with its own strong lines, with its own emphasis on securing its own interests. It's increasing its defense spending. Even this year, was it 6.8% of defense spending increase in 2021? This is a statement that China probably has to make to appeal not only to its own people, but also to secure its own interests, right?
Right. Well, I think you're correct there, Richard. That the declaration that China is going to increase its defence spending by 6.8%, which was made by Premier Li Keqiang at the National People's Congress in Beijing in March, was primarily designed for domestic consumption. And the reason I say that is because there's nothing to verify whether or not he's actually increasing its defence spending by 6.6 or 6.8%. Who is going to be able to check the numbers? Now, presumably there are some people in the People's Red Army and in the Chinese Politburo who have access to the data. But, the American Department of Defense, when it did its report about China in 2020, estimated that China's annual defense budget was something like $200 billion equivalent. And so the increase is not something that's easy to measure at all, actually. It's not a plausible figure, to be absolutely honest with you, Richard. And also, where is this increase going to come? I mean, is it going to pay for the pensions of retired soldiers, or is it going to go into more challenging areas of defense? So there was a report that was issued during the National People's Congress, which said that China was going to be looking more at disruptive technologies. What does that mean? Does that mean cyber attacks, artificial intelligence? All very mysterious, actually, but don't read too much into the figure of 6.8% increase. It could actually be a lot more than that.
Very interesting. I just want to change tack here. We've had the integrated review published in the UK this week, and it was noticeable that Parliament, there were several voices in Parliament that were none too pleased with the exact wording in the copy, which described the CCP in rather less damning terms than they might have really preferred. So I do want to ask you what you think about the Prime Minister Boris Johnson's comments on the UK-China relationship, but I just want to quickly play for our listeners a short excerpt from his speech this week in the House of Commons.
There is no question that China will pose a great challenge for an open society such as ours. But we will also work with China where that is consistent with our values and interests, including building a stronger and positive economic relationship and in addressing climate change.
And that was the Prime Minister there. Just to provide a bit more context as to how this was received, there are examples from both sides of the House that we could have chosen. But we're going to go for the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, who spoke encouragingly about the engagement in the Indo-Pacific region in general, but which he said, quote, comes on the back of an inconsistent policy towards China for a decade, before going on to say that conservative governments have spent 10 years turning a blind eye to human rights abuses while inviting China to help build our infrastructure. Pretty strong words. What do you think about the way that this integrated review has portrayed the current and future relationships between the UK and China?
Well, the most striking thing about the review is that it doesn't place too much emphasis on the United Kingdom's place in the world, on the northeastern corner of the European continent. The review says that the UK should focus its foreign policy towards countries such as India, Japan, Australia, and that's why we're talking about this tilt to the Indo-Pacific region. Interesting, isn't it, that the UK government is using the word Indo-Pacific all the time. That came into fashion under the Trump administration. The Americans more or less invented that phrase, actually, to replace the words Asia-Pacific because they wanted the Indians to come round to their side to counterbalance the influence of China. Mr. Johnson went on to say that the Indo-Pacific is the front line of new security challenges. And again, I thought there was a lot of continuity there between the words of the US Defense Secretary, who said, we need to look together as allies to address global security challenges and engage in long-term strategic competition with China. So, of course, this is about global Britain and resetting Britain's place in the world post-Brexit, but actually pretty much a dominant theme of the integrated review is we want to get as close as possible to the understanding of what America's foreign policy is, including the new American priority, which is the Indo-Pacific, as amply demonstrated by the visit by the US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin to Japan and to South Korea.
Yeah, one of the big statements that the UK is making this year is obviously the deployment of the Queen Elizabeth Carrier Strike Group to the Indo-Pacific region in a couple of months' time. Now, I always thought that the UK's carrier capability would be best served probably by being deployed in and around the Gulf and the Indian Ocean, freeing up US capabilities to move to pivot again. It's a word that's in vogue, isn't it? To pivot again to the Indo-Pacific region. But it seems like the UK is going a step beyond that. It really seems to be set on projecting power not only through the Gulf and Indian Ocean, but into a region it's really not had an awful lot to do with for a couple of decades,
Well, Richard, Her Majesty's Royal Navy is not going this alone. So the HMS Queen Elizabeth, which is due to make this maiden voyage to the Indo-Pacific just as soon as the sailors have had their COVID-19 jabs, it's equipped with American F-35 warplanes. It can't operate as an aircraft carrier unless it's got aircraft on it, and those are American. And it's expected to be joining operations in the South China Sea, which will take place in direct cooperation with the United States and Japanese Navy. What it will be doing is conducting freedom of navigation operations. So the Japanese Defense Minister Nobuo Kishi says that the purpose of these joint exercises will be to challenge China's movements in the region, and that's obviously what Lloyd Austin is expecting too. So I really wonder how much independence this new global Britain, free of the EU, has when it comes to international security and defense policy. It seems to me as though Britain is following the instructions and directions of the United States.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting that the United States is quite keen to uphold the maritime laws and conduct these FONOPs in and around the South China Sea. But of course, the US hasn't signed up to the UN Convention of Law on the Sea, so it seems a little bit of a stretch for the US to start preaching other countries about how they should act at a sea. Anyway, leaving that aside, just a final question. Obviously, the UK wants to forward deploy a lot of its capabilities these days. It's possibly a cheaper, more efficient way of doing so than sending everything from a Portsmouth base. Singapore probably looks to be the best place to do that. It has the facility at Sembawang, doesn't it? How will Singapore? What role will Singapore play in the aspirations for the UK to forward deploy its systems further down the line?
Yeah, my reading of the integrated review is that we actually saw hidden in the fine print a decision here, because there's going to be more investment in UK military bases in Oman, Singapore, and Kenya. In terms of a permanent forward base in Asia, I think there's been a debate about whether that could be in Brunei or in Singapore. Sounds as though it really is coming on the side of Singapore, provided Singapore and the ASEAN nations can agree to it. I mean, the UK already has defence staff in Singapore, as well as having a garrison region in Brunei. And I expect this ties in with the deployment that we were just talking about of the aircraft carrier HMS Queen Elizabeth in East Asia, including patrols of the South China Sea, where it's going to be challenging China in a very direct way.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is all we have got time for this week, which is a crying shame for me. That was a really interesting conversation. It's going to be interesting to follow how the US continues its approach in the Indo-Pacific region, and also what role the UK can chisel out for itself. Doubtless we'll be back debating this once again before the year is out. My thanks again, Duncan Bartlett, for taking the time to provide his insight. It is much appreciated.
Lockheed Martin to deliver target sight systems for FMS
smartphones to Australian KC.
Thales expands tactical communications portfolio.
Multi-band terminal production continues with new.
Look for aircraft to receive
Cut through the noise of defense procurement with Shephard's Defense Insights. Save time identifying opportunities, mitigate risk, and get ahead of the competition with the most user-friendly platform in the market. Head over to shepherdmedia.com/demo to request your free demo and see firsthand how accurate integrated program and equipment data at your fingertips can get you ahead of the competition.
So welcome to this week's Industry Voice segment. This part of the show is brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Wärtsilä Defence Solutions Limited. I'm with Chris Rowlands, who's the Managing Director of WDSL. Chris, thanks for your time today.
Pleasure. Good to meet you.
So I guess today we're here to discuss naval readiness in general, and the company's solutions in particular. But just to sort of kick us off as a bit of a scene setter, I mean, how would you characterize naval readiness, and what's industry's role in this arena?
Okay, well, Navy platforms, they perform unique roles, and that can be in defence, policing, peacekeeping, overseas aid, a whole variety of different roles. And in order to do that effectively, they've got to be able to perform those roles, be ready to perform them to a predefined schedule, sometimes at short notice, and with minimal downtime. So not having a platform available to do what it's there to do is a big problem for a Navy. The role that industry plays in that is enabling those platforms to be ready when those navies need them to be ready, and that's via the equipment that we provide and the services that we provide around that equipment.
So, I mean, let's talk about that. What's the role of Wärtsilä Defence Solutions Limited, and what specific services do you guys provide to navies around the world?
Okay, I suppose several ways to answer the question. It depends at what point in the life cycle we enter this. So for new construction, we provide shaft line products to ships and submarines. So that's things like seals and bearing shafts, cooling water systems, all of that sort of stuff. If it's also for new construction, if we have a larger contract with a customer, then we'll supply the complete shaft line integrated system. So rather than supply individual parts, it'll be the complete system where we'll take the responsibility of how that whole shaft line performs rather than just the individual pieces of equipment. And that's anything from the coupling that connects to the power system, either the electric motor or the diesel engine, all the way through to the propeller. And finally, we provide maintenance, repair, overhaul, so commonly abbreviated to MRO, and that can include spare parts, installation, commissioning, condition monitoring, product upgrades, all of those things. It can also include resolving emergency breakdowns. So you can have problems where maybe a propeller gets damaged through grounding, which can do damage, and then you need to straighten the propeller, to straighten the shaft, redo the alignment, all of those sorts of things. And the way that we do that is we deliver it through a global service network. So the beauty of us being part of this Wärtsilä family is that we have a global network. We've got field service people around the world. We have field service workshops around the world. So it's very easy for us to be close to the customer to deliver these services.
And I mean, just to take a step back a little bit, I mean, for the uninitiated, what role does a vessel's shaft line, play in operating the vessel itself? And what kind of issues might navies encounter? How can operations kind of be affected by a faulty shaft line?
Okay, well, the shaft line, it's the mechanical system that links the prime mover, which is either, as I say, it's a diesel engine or electric motor typically, to the propeller, which is propelling the boat. And the purpose of the shaft line is to transmit the propulsion force that's generated by that propeller or that propulsor spinning to the ship and the submarine via a thrust bearing. And that's what drives the ship or the submarine forward in the water. Navy platforms, they're designed to operate quietly to avoid detection at sea. And there's a number of ways that can be achieved. So if it's in the design phase in the original new construction, then by design, you design in low noise and vibration characteristics at that stage. The next sort of line of defence to maintain that is through proper maintenance, to make sure that everything continues to be operated as it was designed to be. And then finally, if something goes wrong, then you get to the repairing side. So this is where you go in and maybe, as I said before, you might have grounded a propeller and done some damage to the shaft or the bearings or other equipment that you have to then go in and fix. And that's something that we can do, all three of those things. So I suppose that's what makes us a bit unusual, in that we can do all of those things from the new construction to the through life, and we can do it at a distance.
And these kind of solutions, or I guess this problem area, is not unique to navies. There are obviously commercial vessels out there as well affected by some of these things. I guess my question is, how do you take what you offer in the commercial world and then apply it to a navy setting where there might be sort of more greater flexibility or security demands from the military customer?
Okay, that's a good question. It starts with the customer specification. So to determine what's the most appropriate solution for whatever the customer's need is. Sometimes the spec requires us to have features or performance that can only be provided by naval spec equipment. So, for example, for a Navy submarine, it's normal to have underwater explosions and the shock loads that are generated from that to be designed for. You're not going to have those sorts of requirements for a commercial product. In other cases, the specifications are less challenging, and in the less challenging case, it might be possible or even preferable to use a commercial product that's able to meet that reduced specification. One thing that's really important in all of this, of course, is the data, because the sorts of platforms that we're involved with on the Navy side, the data can be quite sensitive. The data that we receive from our customers or that we generate ourselves from the data that they send to us. So one of the key differences between our naval and our commercial businesses are around the way that we protect that data. So, for example, we run our Navy businesses on standalone IT systems on networks, which are completely segregated from all other parts. So we meet all of the naval cybersecurity standards.
And I guess I'm just wondering as well, vessels spend decades in service. They also might be sort of 10, 15 years from the initial design of a vessel to when it's put into service.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent, if the operational profile of a vessel was to change over that time, to what extent can you guys change the setup of the shaft line to reflect that operational change?
Yeah, absolutely. A typical example would be a life extension. So an old ship is given a major overhaul. Sometimes modifications are made to it for either for different mission profiles or for other reasons. Equipment is changed out, different equipment is put in, and that can affect the way that the ship hull deforms. For instance, we did a job 2 years ago where it was exactly that scenario. It was quite an old ship, and it had a life extension. Some equipment changed, and that resulted in some movements around the shaft and the hull that hadn't been there previously. So that's exactly the sort of project that we get involved in, and we'll go and we'll assess the changes that have been made, and in some cases we'll change products. We'll either modify or replace products that are more suitable to the new profile. We will go in and do assessments of the alignment. Has the alignment changed? What does that mean? Do we need to change something in the way that we align the shaft line and the other equipment? So yeah, it's quite common to get involved in those sorts of projects.
Just to wrap things up, what else do we need to know about Wärtsilä Defence Solutions Limited, and the role that you guys play in terms of naval readiness?
I think that we're fairly unique in what we do. We're part of this large Wärtsilä family, and we have the benefits of that and the global footprint and so on. But we're an SME really. As WDSL, we're a small to medium enterprise in terms of our size. That allows us to be quite flexible in what we do. We can do everything from being the detailed engineering, original equipment manufacture down for seals and bearings and other things, and have that speciality. But we're large enough then to orchestrate networks of third-party suppliers, so we can package together and we can do integrated solutions. And then through this network, we have enough flexibility with other parts of our business to offer this through life support. So, as I say, I think we're quite a unique company being able to do these things.
Listeners, to find out more about the topics discussed today, you can search for Wärtsilä's Improving Seal Reliability white paper, and we'll provide a link to that in the show notes. For now, Chris, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
This episode of the Weekly Defence Podcast was brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Wärtsilä Shephard Solutions. A big thanks to everyone who took the time in being with us today, and for our listeners, if you enjoyed the show, make sure you like and subscribe and leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcast. If you want to know more about the market landscape of the defence sector, visit shepherdmedia.com/subscribe and redeem your free trial to our premium news, where you can get international coverage of equipment innovation, company news, programme updates, and more from our team of expert journalists. Until next week, thanks for listening.